I'm the Executive Director of the Australian Centre for Advanced Photovoltaics. This centre was set up in 2012, founded by Professor Martin Green. It's a national centre, so it brings together all of Australia's research institutions that are working in solar photovoltaics. It's hosted by the School of Photovoltaics and Renewable Energy Engineering at UNSW, which is in the Faculty of Engineering. So it's sort of a centre within this bigger body, and it's funded by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. We started in 2012 with 8 years of funding and had an extension for an extra couple of years, and then in 2022 I led a bid to extend the centre for another 8 years to 2030, and we secured the funding, 50 million Australian dollars to fund us out to 2030, and Martin handed over the leadership of the centre to me. So that's a little bit of the history. I came to the university in 2015. The centre had already started. Prior to joining the university, I'd been in this industry for 20 years, in the solar module manufacturing industry in Australia, in Germany and in China. The centre is a national partnership, so it involves all the universities around Australia who are leading in solar, including Australian National University, which has an international reputation in solar, led by Professor Andrew Blakis, but also the University of Melbourne, Monash University and the University of Queensland. Initially, we've also just added the University of Sydney. In addition, we have CSIRO, which is the National Science Laboratories in their manufacturing group and their energy group. And the idea of the centre, funded by this National Renewable Energy Agency, is to create a national network to make sure that we bring all the best people together in a critical mass. We're all working on the same goals. We bring all the chemists together with the mechanical engineers and the physicists and the electrical engineers to solve problems around solar. The nice thing about the centre is that we have long-term certainty in our research profiles. Instead of competing for 2 and 3 year projects, we have 8 and 10 year horizons. And in doing so, we build capacity, and we can invest in people and in longer term programs of work. We can also use it as a platform to access other funding, so we can grow beyond our own program by accessing other funding. And we're encouraged to create startup companies and develop IP and license the technology. This is a group of people, the leaders at all the different centres. I still have Richard Corkish in there. Richard Corkish was the Chief Operating Officer for the last 12 years of operation. He retired last week. So we're evolving as we go. But there's a great team of people working on the centre. This is a little hard to read from a distance, but it's the research program. It will be familiar to many of you working in solar. We have historically had a big program in silicon photovoltaics, and we've seen that technology transfer into industry and grow to become a really significant industry, delivering now around 5% of the world's energy through solar photovoltaics, and we expect that to go to 50% or so of the world's energy over the next 20 years. In the process of growing the industry, we expect to see significant change. One of the changes we expect to see is that we will see the industry reach its maximum capability with single junction silicon photovoltaics within the next few years, getting close to 30% efficiencies. So we have to start looking beyond silicon. So the program of work starts to look beyond silicon. So we're looking at tandem structures, which you're familiar with, the materials that are required to make up those tandem structures, how to turn those little cells that we do in the labs into devices, how to turn those devices into modules, and then look at the performance of those materials all along the supply chain as we create them, but also how they perform in the field. We're also looking at manufacturing and sustainability. So as this industry grows, we have to make sure that we have sufficient materials and that we're using them appropriately, and that we're using them, bringing them back into the system at the end of their life. So the program is designed around all of those aspects of the solar supply chain. There's an example of the kind of things we've been doing. The tandem cell structures we heard a little bit about from Xiaojing during this week, and the work we're doing with Jay remotely as a partner working out of Surrey. We're looking at manufacturing and deployment at scale. We're looking at end of life and recycling. So we have some key strengths in new materials. Again, Xiaojing Hao talked about the adamantine research. We also have a focus on the cost analysis associated with any technology. If we're doing research on a technology, we're really interested in understanding how that technology will be commercialised, what it will take to take it into manufacturing. And we've actually taken that analysis right downstream into performance analysis for solar technologies in the field, and more recently in doing a costing analysis of how and where Australia might participate in the solar supply chain in the manufacturing sense. So looking at silicon refining, ingoting and wafering, cell processing and module assembly. And we're looking increasingly at using AI and machine learning to accelerate our research. One of the key outcomes or outputs of the running a national centre and having a platform for research and education and training is that we run postdoctoral fellowship programs. We run a competitive program, and as a result we're able to secure some of the best and brightest to work on problems that are associated with our goals. You can see a list of people there, some of whom are still at the University of New South Wales and some who've moved on to other locations. We have Jay on there, was one of our early postdoctoral fellows, ACAP fellows. I think, is Michelle up there? Michelle's in the room? No? Okay, sorry. Michelle's not up there, but Michelle was in the room. She was one of our fellows as well. We're looking for commercial outcomes for the technologies we've developed. One of our early PhD students did not finish his PhD. Instead, he set up a process line in his garage with the technology he was trying to develop. And he has commercialised that technology into a company called SunDrive. It's looking at replacing silver in cell processing through copper plating or through plating technologies. We have a company called SolarCycle, which has started. It's now based in the US, based on a recycling technology that was developed here at UNSW. And we have a company called Lab 360, which is doing some in-field luminescence imaging using a really novel and technique for looking at performance of solar cells in the field. So even in that, you can see the technologies we develop across the supply chain are all the way from cell processing, recycling, and in-field performance. We're fortunate, to be supported by ARENA to be able to invest in infrastructure. So we have some really world-class infrastructure for the development of solar cells. And this, you can see there, refers to different institutions around Australia, and we're working together to gain the benefit of these substantial investments. Millions of dollars have invested into, $20 million in total was invested into infrastructure. Monash has what is called a combinatorial sputtering system, and that just allows us to do many different alternative materials within the same system. And it has a lot of automation associated with the processing, which allows us to do things repeatedly, quickly, and with confidence and quality. We have, there's tools around the native solar cell analysis, materials analysis as well as characterization technologies being developed. We're also building out new partnerships around Australia with Australian companies. So a lot of our early partnerships were with big international manufacturers because we had close relationships with the solar cell technologies that were being developed, particularly in China. More recently, we're developing partnerships with Australian companies. We also have developing new international partnerships. We've developed this new program called an industry consortium, where we're getting some of the really large industry players to sign up to work with us on current and future industry challenges. that brings us closer to them and them closer to us. We have a strong list of partnerships with Korea, primarily through our relationship through Jay. And that's the list of partners is there that you can see. We've been working with them for, I think, nearly 10 years. I think since, as long as we've been working, as Jay has been associated with the university, then we've been working with all these Korean companies. And we continue to work with, look for new partners and new programs of work. So we're really interested in what comes from these conversations over the next few days, or the last few days. The reason that we're so well supported is because the Australian government has a vision to Australia having making the most of its resource, which is a large land mass and plenty of sunshine, to develop an economy that displaces exports from coal and gas, which is key to our economy at the moment, with a low cost energy future built on renewables. And from that, we will develop an economy based around hydrogen, and green minerals processing. And to get there, we need what's known as ultra low cost solar. At the moment, solar is already super cheap. In Australia, it's already the lowest cost form of new energy. But we need and want to drive it even lower so that we can add value to the cost of energy, add value by reducing the cost of processing of green hydrogen and green minerals. And the target is to be producing energy at $15 a megawatt hour, US $15 a megawatt hour. I'll tell you a little bit about the market for solar in Australia and compare it with some of the places in the world. This is a little bit of a timeline, and the bubbles are scale appropriately. Basically, the amount of solar installed in Australia has grown tenfold, approximately every 8 or 9 years. So in 2022, we'd reached 30 gigawatts of solar installed. I had a look at the Korean numbers. Korea has a very similar amount of solar installed, 27, I think, gigawatts of solar. Australia's putting in about 4 gigawatts a year of solar, and Korea is putting in about 3 gigawatts a year. We're actually really quite closely placed, both in the amount of solar we have installed and the rate at which we're installing solar. The number was 2022, so we're up in 4 gigawatts, 4.5 gigawatts a year, so we're now closer to 36 gigawatts a year. As a result, Australia has more solar per capita than anywhere else in the world, so close to 1.3 kilowatts a person. Interestingly, unlike the rest of the world, Australia has most of its solar on rooftops rather than the field. 70% of the solar that's installed in Australia is on people's rooftops. And as a result of the combination of rooftop and field utility scale solar, around 20% of the electricity demand in Australia is met by solar annually over the year, and that was last year. And a similar amount was met by wind, so we currently have about a 40% renewable electricity grid. And our target is to reach 82% by 2030. So to get to 82% from 40%, we need to double in the next 8 years, and I showed you the results earlier where we were basically growing tenfold, roughly, every 8 years. So we need to go from our current 35, 36 gigawatts to 80, let's call it 100 gigawatts by 2030, and that's at a slower rate than we have done historically. So we can be reasonably confident that we're going to get our solar installed to meet our targets to get to 82% renewable by 2030. So this is, I've made it 100 gigawatts because it's easier to think in hundreds. So that's the same progression if we go out to 100 gigawatts by 2030. If we could go faster towards 300 gigawatts and then targeting out to 2050, a terawatt of solar is what we need to start to grow this economy, this green hydrogen, green minerals processing economy. Ideally, we have 1 to 3 terawatts of solar. Yes, installed, and a similar amount of wind to power a 100% renewable grid for it to meet our electricity demands, including growth in our electricity needs based on the electrification of everything. So as we electrify transport, as we electrify process heat, we're going to need to grow our renewable energy capacity. And then as we grow an economy around exporting renewable energy through hydrogen and green minerals processing. So we're looking at 1 to 3 terawatts of solar installed in Australia by 2050. That's a really significant investment, obviously, and a significant change. So there's a lot of work for us to do to deliver on that. The question is, where are we going to put all this solar? And do we have the space for it? Even 300 gigawatts, to go from currently 30 gigawatts to 300 gigawatts, where are we going to put that? So we've been doing some research into looking into that. And the University of New South Wales, along with other institutions, the Institute for Sustainable Futures and the APVI, did an analysis and found that there's close to 200 gigawatts of rooftop potential. Most of it's residential, but a significant amount of commercial and industrial. Not only that, if you could ignore the rooftop potential, we could map out how much space we need, how much land we need to install 300 gigawatts of solar. And you can see it on that little dot in the middle of Australia. On the dot at the top left is around 50 or 60 gigawatts of solar, the space it needs, around 1,000 square kilometres. And for 300 gigawatts of solar and 300 gigawatts of wind, we need around 5,000 square kilometres of solar. So Australia has the space and the opportunity to build out this sort of renewable energy future. Then the question is, how much will it cost? And do we have to import everything? Australia is not a strong manufacturer of technologies. Historically, we have been reliant on importing. What we do is export our resources, our gas and our coal and our iron ore, and other people process those into products for the world markets, and we import back what we need. So Australia is imagining a future that looks different, and that is where we don't just dig the resources out of the ground and sell them for other people to process, and that we dig the ores out of the ground, we use our renewable energy to create the energy, and we do the processing here. The question of how much it will cost, we have to imagine with renewable energy there's a higher upfront capital cost and then basically a zero operations cost. Different, of course, to running a coal-fired power station, which is a relatively modest startup cost and then a long-term operating cost. So we do a comparison of what's called the levelised cost of electricity, where you project out over the lifetime of an asset how much it will cost to produce energy from that asset. And the CSIRO, which is the National Scientific Organisation, has done an analysis around the cost of energy from the different assets or different energy generation types, and determined, and this has been the case for about 5 years, that solar and wind offer the lowest cost, long-term cost of energy. And those comparisons are up there for you. So it will cost, it has an upfront capital cost, but the long-term cost of energy from solar is the lowest possible. And that's using modest projections based on current technologies of where the costs will be. Our job as researchers is to find even lower costs of energy, to open up these opportunities even further. As I mentioned, as part of our research, we've developed economic cost models to look at the role Australia has to play in a manufacturing future. And we developed a roadmap, and it was released in February this year. We spent a year on the road developing the roadmap, submitted to government in October. Actually, we started in February last year. We submitted to government in October last year our roadmap for manufacturing, and in February of 2024 the government put aside $1 billion into an initiative to motivate local manufacturing across the solar supply chain. So from silicon, polysilicon refining, ingoting, wafering, cell processing and module assembly. And the $1 billion is really seed capital to try and attract further investment. So the government is on the back of research from the university is making a commitment to bring solar manufacturing into Australia. And this process around planning for a manufacturing future for Australia with a focus on solar is that there have been discussions about for the last 3 or 4 months about how this program will work, and the program will open in August. In addition, with a view to this solar future, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency is opening a new program with $100 million available called the Solar Scale-Up Challenge, and that's to try imagining again this future where we go from 30 gigawatts of solar installed today to 300 gigawatts or 3 terawatts of solar. How are we going to get there, and what we need to change, and what opportunities are created as a result of this new technology development and new asset build out. So what is it that we can learn along the way, and how can we make it faster and lower cost? So there's actually another research initiative out there that says look at how we deploy solar most cost effectively, $100 million research opportunity open. All of this change has results in an awful lot of conversation about what the future looks like and what technologies will have a role to play in that future. But interestingly, and the economists are participating in the conversation now, it's not just the engineers and the technologists who are anticipating a future that's built on solar. And the International Energy Agency, the economists, the Financial Review are now all moving to a future based on solar, which is terrific. And this is literally in the last month that this sort of conversation is in the public domain about engineering and solar. The sun has won is the language that's being used, which is quite exciting. So we've seen the scale of manufacturing grow particularly in China, and with some amazing investments and technology developments that have made solar super competitive. We've seen governments shift to imagine a future built on solar and low-cost energy, and we're now seeing economists talk about a future that's built on solar. The question then is, where does that leave us and research? I would consider this a success. This is a 20, 30 years of effort from engineers and technologists around the world, but an awful lot started here at the University of New South Wales with the work of Martin Green. This year is 50 years of research into solar at the University of New South Wales. The question then is, is the job over? Have we succeeded, or what's left to do? As I advised earlier, we've funded out to 2030 to develop a research program. We're working with industry partners, and it's very clear that they can see that the silicon technology, the single junction silicon technology of today, will reach its maximum in the next few years in industry, in manufacturing, and they want to know what's next. We want to take silicon as far as we can, so towards a 30% efficiency in the field, so that's the optimum outcomes from the silicon cell itself, say 27% from the cell, roughly somewhere 26% module, and then some bifaciality, so where you actually collect light from the back of the solar panels as well to take the efficiencies towards 30% in the field from a single junction silicon, but that's literally as far as it will go with silicon. We need to look at technologies that go beyond 30%, which is the tandem technologies some of which we talked about in the last day. We need to look at new materials, because we've been working on perovskites for a while, and it's clear that there are challenges with perovskites that we might solve, but we might not, and therefore it helps to have other materials groups in contention as well. Solar is still a very young technology. There's still an awful lot of opportunity for us. Lots of material science, lots of chemistry, lots of chemical engineering to be developed. We need to work on sustainability in solar manufacturing as this technology grows. There's an awful lot of materials go into developing solar technologies. We need to make sure that the process is sustainable. We currently use around 10% of the world's silver in solar manufacturing, and we need the industry to grow tenfold. So we clearly can't do that with the current technology that uses 10% of the world's silver. We need to make sure that the modules are built as well as they can be and spend as long as they can in the field. That's the best way to get the best outcome for the cost of electricity. We need to make sure that they perform at their best while they're in the field, that they're reliable. We need to drive down the cost of deployment. That's part of that scale-up challenge. We need to look at recycling and at end of life. And we need to look at integration challenges because we need to back the solar up with storage. We need to make sure we get the grid integration right. We need different types of battery. We need some demand management, which means that we're shifting the way electricity is used, particularly as we generate in the middle of the day more solar than we need. We need to push our demand into that space. And then we need to develop technologies around green hydrogen, green minerals processing to use this low cost of energy that we generate. And that is what this research program that we have developed under ACAP is based on, delivering all of those aspects to deliver an ultra low cost of solar, which will drive a green economy in the future. And we are looking forward to working with you on developing this. ACAP is a national centre, but it has an international profile. It has an international advisory panel, and we have lots of international partnerships, and we're keen to keep developing those. So it's great to have met you all today, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you. I'll stay in screen. Any questions?
Thank you very much for the nice talk. So, as you mentioned, the PV installed nowadays is probably mostly imported from the outside country. So, but probably in terms of energy security, the domestic industry might be also important. So I just wonder, is there any government level support to grow promote the the domestic industry on the PV in Australia?
We have been in conversation with government to try to develop a program around that, and yes, there is a new program that was announced early this year, and will play out over the next probably 10 years, because it will take 10 years to develop some of the technologies. So we are interested in probably in partnering with international players to develop the industry. We did an assessment, and we think the biggest opportunity is in the silicon processing, so the silicon refining, polysilicon. Partly because of the resources we have, we will have a low cost of energy and green energy. Plus, we also have the input, the quartzite, in Australia. So Australia can play a role in the polysilicon processing, ingoting and wafering, perhaps. Also in cell processing, we have technical expertise in cell processing, but it's a challenging technology to do. You have to do it at a really large scale, and the margins are tiny. So maybe in cell processing, but almost certainly in module assembly. And I am imagining within 10 years, industry that looks different to the industry that we have today. We have a lot of concentration of the sector in China at the moment, and that the solar has benefited from that, because that concentration of effort has led to a really fast learning cycle. But I think we've got to a point now where we've demonstrated how cost effective it can be, right? We've convinced the politicians and the economists that a future can be built on solar. Having done that, there's a lot of interest internationally about local manufacturing. So I suspect in the next 10 years we will see offshoring of manufacturing with investments we know it's happening in the US, there's talk about it happening in Europe. I think it'll happen in Australia as well, that there'll be local manufacturing.
So right now, is there any like tax barrier for importing the solar from?
No, there are no tariffs in Australia. Yeah. So solar panels are being deployed in Australia at roughly Australian 70 cents a watt. No, US 70 cents a watt. So $1 Australian, $1 a watt Australian. I can put solar on my roof for $1 a watt. In the US, it's $3 a watt to put solar on your roof, because they have tariffs and they have regulatory hurdles that cost time for installation. In Australia, we've been doing it for a long time, putting solar on rooftops and cutting out all the regulatory hurdles. Plus, we don't have input tariffs, so $1 a watt.
Thank you for the nice overview. In Korea, when we try to implement a solar cell, we have many problems, but one of the problems is the area. Australia, you don't worry about the area for installing a solar cell, but in Korea, we are quite limited. Do you have like a practical solution, for area-wise, area limit?
Mm-hmm. So that, again, improving the efficiency will help there. And what we've seen in 2000, module efficiencies were 10, 11, 12%. And module efficiencies are now 22, 23%. So in 20 years, the efficiency, module level efficiency has doubled, which means you're getting twice the power per square metre. If we can drive that efficiency up above 30%, which is the targets, and we're only going to get there with new materials innovation. So we can improve the per area performance from modules, which has benefits for area but also overall systems costs, because you only need one inverter for then space. So you have use of rooftops. Clearly, that's exposed space is key, particularly industrial rooftops. We don't use those enough in Australia, and it's probably true in Korea, and that's because there's usually the people who own the building are not the same people who are using electricity. So there's a problem with matching the investment and the demand for electricity, which is different to a home. And then the possibility, and I don't know how exactly it plays out in Korea, but I have seen somebody do analysis, and that's floating solar. So solar on waterways. They obviously have to be protected waterways. And depends, around the equator, the water is usually stiller and the wind less. So around the equator, it's a real potential. I imagine that there's spots in Korea where solar will help. But the future will be a mix, and that mix will be different depending on where in the world you are. Australia has a real advantage in solar. Yeah.
Let's thank the speaker and move on to the next.
Thank you.